chance for technical help. Anyway, I wanted to say that it's a great event, and I'm so happy to be here because we heard so many different points of view. Like we discussed nostalgia, fear, visions of the past, but also visions of the future, and immigration and emigration, and the role of media, the role of territory and geography, how it impacts on how voters shape their opinions and their vision of Europe. And it's really difficult to add anything else to such a panorama. But I wanted to say that when one hears also of those presentations, suddenly everything makes sense, or makes more sense. You understand things better. So I will have a modest contribution to it, hopefully. Let me explain to you that I will be double-hatted in the sense that I will be speaking as Paweł Zerka from ECFR, where we run a major project ahead of European Parliament elections, and I am part of a team which is doing this project. But I will also speak as Paweł Zerka, a Pole living in Paris with my own extra-professional observations, and maybe I will manage without that. So
this is.
Okay. And therefore, what I chose for you are two topics that I believe will be that I myself will be watching carefully once the new parliamentary elections are over. But the choice was made by myself. It's not ECFR position here. It's rather based on our project, and I simply chose the things that I think could also be of interest to you. I still hope that I could do it.
I think it's something up there, but I remember
full screen. That's full screen. I do it like this.
Oh, okay, perfect.
So, just to start, I was the main reason why I'm here, I believe, Istvan, is that in February, together with Susie Dennison, we published a paper where we tried to map the situation in every single member state ahead of European parliamentary elections. And what we observed is that there was a risk that anti-Europeans could get as much as 1/3 of seats in the next European Parliament. And as far as I know, this is still an existing risk. Then we also observed that while as all of us know, while divided on substance, they could align with one another tactically, for example, on sanctions on Russia, on blocking elements of Europe's trade policy, or pulling drawbridge up against migration. And all of this would put at risk Europe's capacity to defend its citizens from external threats, exactly at a moment when Europe, because of the external context, needs to show more resolve, cooperation, and global leadership. Of course, you may protest that European Parliament itself is not key on foreign policy of the EU. But as we all know, it all happens in a wider context where cooperation within the Council is already tricky. Here is a map that we tried to sketch a couple of days ago. So if you spot any mistake, just please let me know. But basically, the conclusion is that we already have 3 member states which are led by anti-European rights in Hungary, Poland, and Italy. We have further 6 countries where anti-European right is part of the government in Austria, Slovakia, Latvia, Bulgaria, UK, Finland, and then we also have countries where they provide parliamentary support to the government in Denmark or in Lithuania. Plus, this is already 11, a number that it should be correct because we heard all the same number in the previous panel. But there is also Estonia and Spain, where there is still a possibility that this anti-European right could become part of the government soon, because we have just had elections in Estonia, and there are government talks, and in Spain there will be elections in a couple of weeks from now. So, and anyway, the role of the European Parliament on foreign policy is non-negligible. It's largely about shaping shaping a discourse, providing a normative guidance through non-binding resolutions. But still, those two graphs show that in the European Parliament there have usually been efforts to secure a very wide support among behind those resolutions, because they carry a huge symbolic value. So there is a question whether the future European Parliament could still serve this important normative, symbolic, discourse shaping role. And apart from that, European Parliament has a power of the purse. It can decide on the annual budget, or has an important role in this process, which has a direct impact on the European External Action Service. Also, European Parliament has a limited but non-negligible role in the multi-annual financial framework. And therefore, also through that channel, that might impact on several elements of the budget, like development policy, which are related to foreign policy. And again, foreign policy could suffer because of the political turmoil after May 2019. Just to add on that, European Parliament also provides consent to trade agreements. Of course, for such a consent, you need 50%. You need simple majority, which means that with 1/3 of votes, you cannot block things, but you can make things more difficult for the mainstream, which not always is on the same page on the main priorities. And finally, with 1/3 of votes, you can already block the European Parliament's role within the Article 7 procedures. And if the next European Parliament cannot be effective on this in this area, this will also have an important external consequence, because Europe would no longer be able to claim any kind of leadership on democracy and or rule of law. Actually, already now it's problematic. So the question that we asked ourselves is whether foreign policy wouldn't become an easy victim of the political turmoil after the European parliamentary elections, and this is it could become so because foreign policy has become very much politicized. It's not just something that only diplomats do, but it also relates to migration, development, trade issues, which steer a lot of emotions and are not just abstract. And secondly, the parties, whatever we call them, anti-European, populists, etc., they are not just anti-European. Many of them also are against various forms of multilateral cooperation, be it on migration, climate, or economic issues, and therefore, to be sure, many of them don't care about those issues at all. But foreign policy could, on the one hand, become an easy target of their activity and of their discourse. And even more so because some of them ideologically oppose various elements of the consensus on Europe's foreign policy interests. And therefore, we initiated a project which is called Unlocking Europe's Majority, and it refers to what Corina said about loud minority. We are focusing on the silent majority. As part of this project, we have conducted 2 surveys in 14 EU member states, and we are progressively publishing some results of this research. Just to tell you that next week, hopefully on Wednesday, Mark Leonard and Ivan Krastev and Susie Denison will publish a major report based on the first round of the survey with recommendations ahead of the European Parliamentary elections. But let me quickly go to another issue which I personally consider as truly important, and I hope that it will be discussed over the next years. It has already been flagged by other speakers before me here at this conference. I don't have clear responses, so I will present you some stuff which hopefully would serve as a basis for a discussion, but don't expect that I will provide a lot of policy recommendations right now. So it's not a surprise. These are Central European countries, including Austria, and a question is about issues that societies care most about. Unsurprisingly, it's not immigration, because maybe it's not such a national issue. And so in Romania it's mostly corruption, but corruption is strong also in Slovakia, Hungary, a little bit less in Poland. Pensions, health, cost of living. These are all the issues that are most on mind of Central European societies. But this is shocking to see that an apparently non-existing problem of immigration is seen as such a great concern in the Czech Republic and Hungary. This is the red chart for Czech Republic and Hungary, and it becomes even more serious when you look at the results to the question on whether, as a response to the migration challenge, the government should stop all migration to the country, whether it's legal or illegal. So look at Czech Republic, Hungary, Romania, and Slovakia. Poland is the only one here which is not as shocking, but still 1/3 of the population saying that all immigration should be blocked. When I saw that, I was truly surprised, and so one of the hypotheses that we have, and which Ivan Krastev has been discussing for many years, and which we also mentioned a couple of weeks ago when publishing first elements of the survey, was that it's largely about emigration rather than immigration, at least in this region. So out of the 14 countries that we analyzed, there were 6, Romania, Poland, and Hungary, plus Italy, Spain, and Greece, where more people said that they feared emigration than the number of those who said that they fear immigration most of all. To be sure, here you have results for the 6 countries of the Central Europe. As you see, for Poland, Hungary, and Romania, the blue field is the number of people who say that they fear emigration and nothing else. But you can also notice that there is a orange field for those who feel both equally. And then it's still surprising to me to see that Slovakians, Czechs fear immigration most of all. I cannot make sense of it. I don't know whether this is about the discourse, about the media, what exactly this is about. But my hypothesis is that behind that, there should still be some concern about emigration, even if it's not visible on those graphs. So a question that I've been asking myself, and I have no answer. This has been raised by other speakers here. What should be done about it? So yesterday it was Jürgen who suggested that structural funds should be used in a different way, so that we create well-functioning regional centers, or so that locally the economy works well and people are encouraged to stay or even come back, rather than us accepting blindly that people should go where work is. So Jürgen was saying that it should be the other way around. That the European Union should rather focus on bringing work to where people are. But still, a challenge to such a policy recommendation is that this is still national governments who shape operational programs and who decide how the European money is being spent. I'm not sure whether there is much role for the European leadership on such policy prescriptions. Of course, those policy prescriptions all assume that there is a political will to solve the problem, which might not necessarily be the case. Then another idea, which I guess, Corina, you were mentioning something like that, is that as long as the Eurozone is not completed, and as long as it fragments the European Union rather than as it fragments the European Union, because some countries belong to it and others not, then we shouldn't be surprised that there are such important flows of people from Europe's periphery traveling to the center of the European EU economy. And therefore, a question is whether that shouldn't be part of the mix of policies or mix of focuses to address the problem of emigration, if we treat it as a problem. For me, an important issue is being serious about protection of rule of law and democracy. I cannot substantiate it with data, but my impression is that the fact that democracy and rule of law can easily decay in some countries, and that the EU, which should react to that, does not necessarily provide that role of a defender and protector, that may only encourage more people to leave their countries and make it more difficult in the long run for them to come back. But this is still a very modest list, and as you've noticed, it's problematic to see how actually those prescriptions could work in practice. So if you have any other ideas, I would be happy to discuss them with you. Just as a final thing, if I guess that if the EU does not discuss the issue and does not find ideas as how to address the problem, then the easiest solution to the problem might be to limit mobility, meaning hamper people from emigrating from the countries, even if it is within the European Union. That sounds very radical, but then when you ask people whether they would actually support such an idea, and the question was, should the government prevent nationals from leaving the country for long periods of time, then the red charts show that in Hungary and Poland, actually half of the population would already be in favor of such a policy idea. And therefore, you see that there is a trade-off between citizen mobility and national sustainability. And if the issue is not addressed, then my hypothesis is that it will only result in more frustrations, more anger, and more radicalism, which all of have been major topics discussed at this event. So, thank you. Here.
I would like to ask if you could put this last slide back.
Which one?
this one, is this really true? I mean, that Hungary, half of Hungarians want their government to prevent leaving the country? Is this right? What I'm...
Yes. This is the question that was asked in the survey. So it was.
Sorry, but should the government prevent nationals from leaving the country for long periods of time? And in Hungary, 49% says yes, they should. Well, this is the first time I ever see such a chart, and it totally surprises me because it's probably, well, I haven't seen it, because one of the main points of regime change in Hungary and joining the EU was free movement. I mean, that's the most important thing. It's not only it's symbolic, and because my generation was spent most of half of their lifetime behind the Iron Curtain. So I just find it inconceivable. Such an idea. This really would. I mean, even me, if this happened, I mean, in the EU, I think maybe I would also say that, okay, the EU is not worth anything anymore. So that's the most important thing. I mean, it's a matter of freedom. It does have something to do, of course, with cost of living, with the higher wages, but it's a freedom, as somebody said, it's a peace project, a freedom project, Europe. So I don't think anybody in Hungary, I mean, I just really doubt these figures. I don't know.
May I just have a question of clarification concerning this? I mean, not to fade it away. Because honestly speaking, I don't really get...
Stop.
Yeah. I don't really get the question. I mean,
because it might be interpreted in various ways. I'm a sociologist, so let's operationalize what we mean. So should the government prevent, in a sense, should they restrict brutally, or should government do something meaningful, positive to prevent? I mean, it's unclear for me.
That's true.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I cannot interpret it as a sociologist. It's empty for me.
We're not talking about bureaucratic limits, but economic improvement. Okay, Edith wants to add something, and then we will open the floor. Yes, next one, but Edith, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to add one thing to what has been said by Paweł, and this very interesting, a little bit like contradictory chart, is that together with Political Capital and Communist University, we had a chance to conduct some focus group discussions in the Hungarian countryside about comprehending and understanding Euroscepticism. And one of the key findings that we found is just quite like resembling to what has been said by you, because it just turned out that most of the biggest achievements of the EU integration, such as free movement, open borders, so on and so forth, has been basically overshadowed by competing narratives spread by the Hungarian government, which is migration on one hand, which is the strongest external threat, and also economy-based sort of anxiety, fears about having open borders, having the chance to have, for instance, Czech labor workers to come in, not like take over Hungarian jobs, but to earn more for the same job that Hungarian people are doing. So there is an anxiety and a market protection kind of feeling that they don't like it. So this is the way how the achievement of open borders and free movement is being overshadowed by competing narratives.
I would also say that perhaps it highlights the difference between ideal and praxis, and I think it goes a lot of other concepts and ideas and policies that we hold dear, that are quite fundamental, are being challenged in a similar manner. It is true that I can also think and remember polls and all sort of evidence pointing in the direction that one of the reasons for support for the EU and integration and enlargement and so on the part of these countries has been particularly the ability to travel freely. But at the same time, we can also understand this type of graphs because people are wary and overwhelmed by reality and concerned about the future. In a situation where doctors are leaving, your children are leaving and not returning, and so on and so forth. So there is a contradiction, but I probably highlights more of a paradox because they would like to maintain freedom of movement, but at the same time they can see the consequences of that in practice. And I think the same goes with other concepts and other ideas and other policies. I mean, everything up to representative democracy, really. But I don't want to go into detail. So that could maybe offer another explanation.
Questions?
Three very quick reflection. Regarding migration, if we prevent national migration, most of the people will go to the US. No, but let's be very clear. Let's be very clear. And the level of migration in Europe is between 2 and 3% working migration against 20 in the US. So it is not a lot.
But it's a key issue for some countries. Sorry.
Yeah, but the real issue, let's take Romania for example. Do you know that Romania is one of the first provider of video game engineers? Where do they go? They go to Canada, or they go sometime to London, and once they're in London, then they go to Canada or the US. So it's just a temporary platform. So the real question is, shouldn't we develop a video game valley in... No, but I mean...
Yeah, true.
And what we need to connect is industrial reflection and migration. And the lack of industrial thinking, which was, for example, in the recommendation of EPC, is a real issue. Second example, most people in Europe consider that climate change is a top priority. But if you look at European strategy and national strategy, there is no connection between environmental industry and climate change. And there is nothing in the program of the political parties, and nobody thinking about that at the European Commission. It's only silo. In China, they do it. In the US, they have a federal administration to do it. So there is a lack of thinking. And the third issue, because you pointed out the key issue, I think one of the key problems of the EU is our capacity to take quick decisions. Mm-hmm. If we want to take a decision, it's a 5-year time.
Yes.
What
Absolutely.
we need, and I know well the Lisbon Treaty, is we need to speed up and to improve the decision process and the implementation process. Because by doing that, just imagine that we reduce by 2 years the time, we are much more efficient and we answer much more to the expectation of people. Who is thinking and speaking about that? It's an obvious issue and nobody. So what I see is...
Fabian Zulek is speaking about that.
Maybe, but I mean at political level. I don't think about the think tank or ourselves, but I'm just saying that there is a lack of political thinking. And if you look at the Renaissance paper of Macron, it's only generalities. There is no ideas. It's poor. So there is a real question, which is why our politicians, even the liberals, are so poor in terms of thinking. And for me, that's the key issue. And somehow you said we need creative thinking. We have not that. The real issue is there. And we do not point out well the problem. So we raise the bad question. This is my thinking, but just thinking of the 3 questions I have raised, and you will see they are obvious. Nobody is speaking about it in the political way.
Mm-hmm. True.
The role of the European Parliament can be quite easily enhanced. The problem is how much political will and power would the MEPs have, maybe with mandate from home or by their own convictions. And there are 3 areas where the role in terms of foreign policy of the European Parliament is pretty important. The first is the processes of enlargement. Mm-hmm. And I have my own experience on this, and I know what the European Parliament, how difficult it is the European Parliament to convince about the opportunity and the legitimacy of this process. Second, the sanctions. And the European Parliament is heavily bound to express its will and its rationale when it comes to sanctioning, for example, Russian Federation. And the third, the observer missions. And the observer missions, may they be sent to Madagascar or to Nepal or to Southern Africa, in a way they represent the political outreach of the European Parliament. And taking this into account, I will now come to Corina. Corina, what would you see the role of the Service for External Action be in the forthcoming throughout the forthcoming month, after the changes the European Commission will undergo? Because under Mrs. Mogherini, and this is my humble opinion, I'm sorry for this, the service was good in representing the European Union, but lacked creativity. Its political action is pretty much vague. And on the other hand, when it comes to difficult political questions, such as, for example, addressing the situation in nowadays Libya, the answers that come from Brussels are at least, and this is the best word I can find at the moment, contradictory. So what could this service look like when the European Commission would change?
The question is really simple. Could you please give me concrete examples of what do you expect would be the suggestions of the of Hungarian and Polish Eurosceptics once in the European Parliament? Because I hear concrete things. What are they going to suggest? What do you think? And to you, Corina, the same thing. If we're expecting 30% of the populists, or however you call them, to be represented, what are their first measures? How are we, the citizens, going to feel them? What is going to be the change in the first 100 days? What can they actually do, and in what areas? Thank you.
After seeing the ECFR results, Paweł, I really would like to see the data. But apart from that, I would have a question for Corina. I found very interesting your recommendations in terms of the institutional future of the EU, and I'm concretely curious about the European Commission. So I will definitely read the paper, but I can't wait until I get home to do that. So I would like to ask you, why would you promise setting up an agency for the policy area and thus taking away the policy area from the Commission, where the EU is actually maybe most successful? Why would you set up an agency for trade? Why would you take it away from the Commission? And what would be the added value for that? Thank you.
Speaking about Poland and Hungary, very often people see two countries that are heading in the same way to some kind of soft authoritarianism, which I believe is false. You know, the picture that those countries are so similar, and there is general wisdom that basically, and this will be simplification, Kaczynski is an ideologue who wants to protect supposedly Catholic Poland from decadency and liberalism of the West. He might be dreaming about some genuine Piłsudski concept of sanacja from the 20s and 30s, yeah? And many people see it this way. While in case of Hungary, many people think that Orban is just a cynical player who uses all arguments against the West just to cement his power in Hungary. But it's probably more complex than that. So can we find some answer whether those two almost Weberian ideal type of answers might be complicated somehow? And my question to all of you about structural funds, Paweł mentioned structural funds as well. I believe that in case of some countries, and Slovakia definitely belongs to that group, structural funds should be stopped, and very soon and very brutally. I even argue, and I know what I'm talking about, if structural funds would have been stopped after Kuciak case, the government of Pellegrini is not there anymore. It would collapse basically in the next week after structural funds would be stopped. The problem is that structural funds at the moment, of course, are helping to a certain extent build some highways, but at the same time they are strengthening position of oligarchs year by year, brutally. And the results will only come in the future. So basically, German taxpayer is paying that countries such as Slovakia will be troublemaker, let's say 10 or 15 or 20 years from now. And my question is, how, whether you agree with it, because I'm absolutely aware of negatives, negative sides of it. that we will be losing countries such as Slovakia because, you know, support for European Union will be dropping down, cohesion of the European Union might be fading away. You know, that's clear. But I mean, the situation, at least in Slovakia, is dangerous already because of Eurofunds, and nobody in Brussels listens.
First, to your comment regarding creativity, I couldn't agree more, but I think the reason why there's still inertia or reluctance to engage seriously with this topic is also because it challenges us to the core in a way, and I'm sent to think of a joke somebody mentioned recently about Henry Ford saying that if he was to ask people what they wanted, they would say faster horses. And it's a bit like this. Right now, I mean, we're limited by our concepts and by our nostalgias and by our way of thinking. And getting us to think of cars instead of faster horses is a challenge. So I think this is the first obstacle that we face in engaging seriously with creative thinking, if you want. So that would be my reaction to you, Guillaume. But I think, but I definitely agree that sooner or later we will have to kind of put it on the table and decide on what are the red lines, what we keep, what we throw away, and how we move forward. And I think, I hope that we will still be able to control the way we're going with things, because I mean, if I only think of technology, I mean, things are developing so fast that the politics of tomorrow will look very different from the politics of today, and hopefully we won't get to the point where it's already a fact that things have changed, and with us having had little influence about the direction of things. So it is a big challenge. I agree with you. With the European External Action Service, I have to say that I haven't given it any thought. I don't have a answer off the top of my head right now. I think it is a problem. I mean, I work on the Balkans as the other side of my portfolio, and I know the challenges that the External Action Service has in that area. If I only think of the Kosovo-Serbia dialogue and how much of a fiasco that has been, and of course we haven't seen the end of that story, but it is an example of how things can go really, really wrong. And I would say that for that, I mean, the problem is also that the member states want to maintain a say and have their competencies that they defend in areas where the External Action Service is also supposed to have an influence. So I guess fixing the relationship and the line of competencies between national level and the EU, and also the role of the External Action Service within the institutional architecture is the first step. But I'm no expert on this. I haven't given it much thought, so take it with a grain of salt. When it comes to the transfer to independent agency, my colleagues who have elaborated this in the publication refer mostly to the enforcement role of the Commission, and that rather than anything else, and that has been recommended in an attempt to deal with the fact that the Commission could be very politicized, and when it comes to enforcing certain policy, would be better maybe to delegate it to more independent bodies rather than to leave it in the hands of commissioners and to people who might have a specific interest to go one way or the other. So it was in that sense. I don't know if there was something else.
Yes. What can we expect?
Okay, yeah, and you said this. I mean, I'm not a spokesperson for these parties, and we know that they're very diverse, having read recently declarations in the context of this attempt to form a new political group, I mean, they say that there are points of commonality, there are things that unite them, and those revolve mostly around security, defense of borders, immigration, things like that. But I am skeptical even about that, because as we've heard, immigration is not a concern everywhere, and no government at present really advocates free open border either. So the extent to which really they still hold a monopoly on that discourse, I'm not sure. In terms of policy, it will depend on whether they manage to form this group, on how they forge alliances, on how coherent and cohesive they are when they vote. But in the immediate period, I more than a rhetorical, maybe an influence on rhetoric and on discourse, I don't think we can expect much in that regard. At least this would be my reading of the situation.
Thank you. So what should be expected from Hungarian Eurosceptic populists within the EP? Well, I think that it's quite hard to check the crystal ball, but I think one of them would be for sure to strengthen nation states and to preserve societies based on Christian, traditional values, preserving it as a homogeneous sort of society. But most importantly, what Viktor Orbán is willing to achieve is to become some sort of bridgehead of the far right within the center. That's very important, that he would like to see more stronger cooperation between the fringe and the mainstream when it comes to the European People's Party's coalition building strategies. And I think he should be really careful what does he wish for, Viktor Orbán. Because if, and I'm referring to the presentation of Paweł, should Eurosceptic populists achieve more than 33% and achieve better policy coordination and somehow try to slow down or block the decision making of the EU or the European Parliament's contribution to the European decision making, that could result in many dangerous phenomena. For instance, strengthened intergovernmentalism, which is definitely not beneficiary for smaller member states such as the V4 countries. The European Parliament can simply get bypassed by bigger member states if there is a complication within the decision-making system. So I think that's a systemic risk that should be taken into account when Viktor Orbán is wishing for stronger nation states and strengthened intergovernmentalism, because if it's strengthened further, that could be problematic for V4 countries. And also it could be some sort of reversion of historical progress when it comes to the role of the European Parliament, which has been strengthened further and further. Not to mention how democratic deficit could get increased. And to the question of Michal regarding the EU funds, given the fact that the main target of state corruption in Hungary is EU funds, I think it's quite correct to demand some sort, introducing and implementing some sort of political conditionalities, anti-corruption rather than rule of law, that could work on a practical level. But I think instead of coming up with new ideas and new mechanisms, that would be much more important to focus on the currently existing legal framework that is being given by the Lisbon Treaty and the whole institutional and legal framework. And for instance, Article 142 of the Common Provision Regulations allow to suspend EU funds when there is a systemic risk of violation of the rule of law. So I think
it's used in Bulgaria, no?
Yes, but it hasn't been used in terms of Hungary, and it should be. So that's one thing. And the other thing, referring to what has been said by Guillermo about being efficient and fast, this is crucially important, and this is one of my key recommendations when it comes to how to constrain efficiently member states, is that so far what we have seen is that with regards to Article 7 and the rule of law framework, it has proven to be absolutely unsuitable to constrain authoritarian regime building in Poland and Hungary. What worked to a certain manner was a clash, or at least some sort of power struggle between member states and European Court of Justice. So what we have seen is that with regards to Poland, I think it was quite important that there was a much more efficient and progressive law enforcement approach from the side of the Commission. But it was also because there was a certain creativity on the side of the Polish judges, because the Polish judges has turned towards the European Court of Justice in order to have a preliminary ruling regarding the Supreme Court, and it worked out because both the Commission and the European Court of Justice has reacted much faster, much more efficient, and I would like to see a similar approach when it comes to Hungary, because if you remember, with regards to Hungary, the very cautious reference point was not the very principle of judiciary independence ever. It's been always other things like discrimination and gender issues and so on and so forth.
2 points. First, that it could be used, however, it could be exploited by this this type of actors in order to give some sort of backing to their anti-EU discourse. That's one thing. And the second is that I don't know if it's the structural funds as such or the fact that in fact those countries were not ready to absorb them, to use them properly, and all of that. If I remember, friends of mine were asking me before Romania joined the EU, are you excited that Romania will join? You'll see in a few times everything will change. The friends from Spain, for example, because in Spain it has served to transform the country, the roads, the infrastructure, everything, which hasn't happened in Central Eastern Europe. I mean, I went home after 8 years late last year, and I was shocked to see that basically it was like in one of those telenovelas. You know, I caught the movie where I left it. You know, nothing. I couldn't see any tangible change. Of course, if you move away from the capital and you go into the country, and I think, I mean, the reason why this hasn't worked, and I'm thinking also of Romania now, is because you didn't have the structures in place and properly prepared to be able to use those funds. So I don't know if it's the funds as such or the EU lacking a strategy and a proper solution for how you transform those countries democratically, how you consolidate them, how you ensure convergence economically beyond the usage of structural funds. So I'm not saying no to what you're proposing, but I know that there are also counterpoints to it, let's say.
We should finish so very shortly on 2 questions. One on what we can expect from 1/3 of them. It's very easy to find this number 1/3 as something which is scary, but actually we all know that alliances between them would be difficult. It's difficult to imagine that Law and Justice would support Salvini in his attempt to, for example, finish the sanctions on Russia or things like that. Therefore, there are other risks which are much more difficult to quantify. For example, the fact that if they are more numerous, those different formations, then finally they might decide that they want to be active in European Parliament processes, which has usually not been the case. They very often got seats, were almost inactive in committees and etc. And now they may change such a calculation, especially if on the other side the mainstream forces are not just weakened and divided, but also sent to the European Parliament inexperienced members of European Parliament. So these are also the vulnerabilities, and for me a big risk is that would all end up displaying an image of inefficiency on the part of the European Parliament at times when there are huge expectations that the European Parliament could deliver. And one short comment on Václav's observation that the question is difficult to understand, what we mean by preventing nationals from leaving the country. I fully agree with you. Such questions are often vague on purpose, but still, if we realize that mobility has been seen as one of the key elements of European integration for Central European societies, and therefore any sort of preventing people from leaving looks like ending up with this laissez-faire approach where people are actually left to choose freely whether they want to stay or leave. I'm not saying whether this is good or not. If it's about making good opportunities for people to stay, that would actually be something that I would recommend. So it means that in a way, we shouldn't trust anything that we see on the graphs, which are for aggregate numbers, because there is still a lot of analysis for us to do, checking whether those people who say that the government should prevent people from leaving are the same people who fear emigration, or maybe those who fear immigration. Whether they are older, younger, what is their profile? So stay tuned, because we'll be doing such analysis. So.